Yes, you are a compulsive liar.
No need to be like that. Charles, have I ever lied to you?
I hardly know you.
Exactly.
Hey MojoPlays viewers, and welcome to part 2 of our 2-part review of Red Dead Redemption 2. That's a lot of twos. While the first video was a spoiler-free review of the game's first half, this video is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion. So you have been warned. If you haven't finished the game yet, there you go.
Dutch knows my value to the cause, as from the moment I met him.
You tried to kill him, if I remember the story right.
Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. So I guess the first thing you all want to know is, have my impressions on the game changed since the first video? Yes, quite significantly I might add as well. Most of that is in relation to the story, so let's start there.
Penelope Breakpoint, this ain't about no star-crossed loves.
As I said in the first video, during the first half of the game, I really enjoyed the chemistry between the gang members to the point where they started to feel like extended family members. While these folks are criminals, their motivations make them believable, in some cases, relatable. But oh boy, it's the story's second half, which I hadn't gotten up to when I did the spoiler-free review, that the quality cranks up to 11.
I just need somebody to buy me some goddamn time, one of you.
You'll figure it out, boss. You always do.
Let's talk about the characters first though. Arthur is a great protagonist to follow. Probably not as good as John in the first game, and that's mostly from the way the game sets up its pacing for the first half. But when that plot twist hits, it hits hard, and you really start to see him really firing on all cylinders to really hit his full potential as an anti-hero.
I'm worried my path is coming to an end, Mr. Swanson.
Maybe. I felt that way for a long time about myself. But you'll do what's right.
Dutch is also a great character, being given far more room to develop in this title with some fantastic dialogue, and the way the game frames itself between not being able to distinguish if he's losing his mind or if he's always been this deceptive and we've been tricked this whole time is masterfully done. All of this is elevated by the brilliant charismatic performance given by the actor Benjamin Brian Davis. Well done, man.
We're back, and I'm sitting here, and I am contemplating the great journey of the sun and considering a famous chess move.
While John Marston mostly plays a supporting role for a large portion of the game, he does get an epilogue all to himself that essentially sets up the events of the first game. Nevertheless, despite his limited development, seeing as we already knew his fate, it was great to see how he went from being one of Dutch's favorites to trying to be a family man.
So make yourself good and honest.
I'm always honest. Maybe not always good, but I'm always honest.
In all honesty though, the real star of the show is Sadie Adler. She has the best development out of any other character in the game, starting from a helpless, near-frozen widow to slowly making her way up the gang's ranks and eventually becoming one of the most respected bounty hunters in the state. It's so good in fact that at times I wish she was the main character. There is a big misstep that the game makes with her, but I'll get to that later.
They turned me into a monster, Arthur. But my memories of him, they still pure.
While I still think the first chapter drags on a bit too long, Chapter 2 certainly makes up for it, since it serves as a great way to immerse the player into the world and to get a feel of the gang and the locations you'll be visiting. My point about the forced writing sections at the start of the missions, at least here, still stand, but they do improve later in the game. And yes, I know fast travel is a thing, and that's not really related to the fast travel since it happens in the missions, not in the free roam. And some people got confused with that. Chapter 3, just outside of Rhodes, while not as strong as the previous chapter, was still really enjoyable. That whole arc about the gang getting themselves caught in between a long-running blood feud between two families was really engaging, and the whole section felt very well paced.
I'm gonna let fly at those sons of bitches!
John, I need you to stay calm.
Chapter 4 is where the missions felt more like an early Grand Theft Auto title rather than a Western. Not that there was anything wrong with that, though the fact that there were things like driving a remote-controlled boat in 1899, or how the chapter started with a party with some of the city's main political figureheads present, definitely gave me flashbacks to Vice City.
And that is Hector Fellows, this self-righteous newspaper man. Maybe you will kill him for me one day.
But it's also here that we start to see how Dutch thinks he can end it all with a big bank robbery, while at the same time starting to get caught in obvious traps, which ends up costing them dearly.
And we each got $15. Oh, and a quarter. Don't forget the quarter.
Shut up, Arthur. He set us up.
It's the game's 6th chapter that, in my opinion, makes up some of the game's best moments. So many new factors come into play here. The current camp location is a miserable cave, the money box has been stolen so camp supplies become very limited, Dutch is cracking, or has always been like this, not to mention Arthur's diagnosis. Okay, it was obvious that Arthur wasn't going to survive since he's not in the first Red Dead Redemption, but the way Rockstar handled his character here was brilliant. He knew that the gang isn't going to survive if they keep following Dutch, and thus has to go behind his back to slowly convince those he cares about the most to leave. It's a heartbreaking time considering how much I came to grow attached to each of the gang members, but at the same time, you know it's for the best. Well, you know the whole thing can go south at any moment.
Well, if I was you, I'd disappear too. This is all pretty much over.
I'll be back.
No, you won't. Let's not pretend no more.
And while all that's going on, we also have a story revolving around a Native American tribe being driven off their land. Now, obviously, this was going to be a tricky subject matter, and one that Rockstar couldn't gloss over considering the game's size, time period, and location. Yet the very personal and relatable direction they took, where you have the two viewpoints of the chief, Rains Falls, and his son, Eagle Flies, was a smart one. You can certainly see both sides of their argument, and it's made even more harsh by the fact that they have a friend that's in the US Army that's essentially framed for a bogus crime simply for trying to help their plight. Yeah, the game obviously wasn't going to hit a lot of the nuanced issues of the time, but for what they did it well.
My father, even he may have to fight.
You won't win. No big fight with them.
It's a chapter with so many factors that end up culminating in an incredible story. In fact, hear me out here. I would even go as far to say that it may be one of the best video game stories ever written. With the game getting so many 10 out of 10 reviews, it's now very easy to see why based on its narrative alone. But while it is an incredible story, it is not a flawless one, and I feel like this is a side effect of the game's intense length. While I do have some minor gripes that would come off as nitpicks in the grand picture, the game does make one major misfire.
Where the hell am I?
Chapter 5 set on Guarma feels incredibly underdeveloped and out of place. I can see what they were going for, and the game even gives hints of the similarities to the Mexican Revolution segment from the first game. But here, the whole story with Arthur, Dutch, and the others having to fight their way off a tropical island doesn't really feel necessary, because aside from a few fleeting mentions about the island afterward, the location itself doesn't really have a lasting impact on the story. The closest we get to something plot important is Dutch killing an old woman who had been guiding him and Arthur, but that's far from the craziest thing that Dutch has done throughout the entire game. Like, if you cut that out, like, it wouldn't have made much of a difference.
You keep killing folk, Dutch.
I am just trying to make sure that some of us survive, Arthur.
Even worse, though, is that the missions on the island are very poorly executed, with the final battle feeling more like something out of a generic Call of Duty single-player mission, right down to the cannon fight with a warship. Like, a freaking warship? Cowboys against a freaking warship? It's a completely unnecessary shift of tone that feels more like Rockstar is trying to tease an upcoming game or DLC, considering that the actual plot with the island's inhabitants isn't even resolved by the time Dutch's gang leaves, and it's almost as soon as they arrived.
Are you gonna be okay?
We'll be like you. We'll disappear, probably.
But this is also where the game makes its biggest misstep with Sadie, because upon reuniting with the rest of the gang, we learned that while all the gunslingers were gone, it was Sadie that single-handedly protected the non-combatants and got them to safety. It's essentially what could have been Sadie's most badass moment in the game, and it happens off-screen. Honestly, I would prefer to see that rather than what happened on the island. That would have been a much more cooler story to look at.
Mrs. Adler, we owe you.
Yes.
Nevertheless, my feelings on the story have definitely improved a lot since the first video, but my feelings on the gameplay have not.
Take this and bore a hole through that wall.
The main missions still have the same hand-holding problem I mentioned in the first video, pretty much right until the end. It's especially bad in missions where you have to infiltrate enemy compounds, where all you need to do is just follow your allies' specific instructions. Plus, the amount of time the player gets ambushed by riders on horseback during getaways starts to make a lot of the missions become predictable towards the end. Seriously, where did all these guys come from? There is an absurd disconnect between story and gameplay in the fact that the body count in the game is ridiculously high. In fact, I find it rather hard to believe that this is supposed to be the end of the outlaw era, when most of the rival gangs seem to have an endless supply of gunmen. Hell, Arthur and the gang kill enough people just during missions alone that it would be enough to depopulate half the state during that era.
I've killed too often and poorly, but not this time, son.
Though, For all the annoying missions out there were some really great ones. The trek through the alligator swamp was pulse-pounding from start to finish. The ride up the mountain with Rainsfall was certainly one of the game's most beautiful moments. And the liberation of Eagle Flies from the army base and its subsequent escape down a raging river during an intense storm was freaking epic! That's just to name a few examples.
Go with him. Try and help there. I'm better off alone.
We're riding with you.
Come on, then. Yeah!
Let's ride!
So in the end, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a phenomenal open world title. The story is an instant classic and will be remembered for years to come. It does fall short in some areas, and I stand by my points about the heavy handholding, but overall the game is really something that should not be missed by anyone. It is that good.
Mrs. Adler. Ride with me.
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos straight away.